Welcome to Daily Review, your daily dose of literary exploration. We dive into books that spark curiosity and ignite growth. While our passion often leads us to nonfiction reads that empower and improve your life, no book is off limits. From gripping thrillers to insightful memoirs and compelling fiction to historical accounts, we're here to share and discuss all the interesting reads we discover. Tune in for your next great book idea. And today we are definitely diving into one of those interesting reads. It's based on source material you brought us, the book Who Wrestle With God, Perceptions of the Divine by Dr. Jordan B. Peterson.
That's right. It just came out in 2024 from Portfolio Penguin.
And our mission today really is to get into these excerpts you provided, sort of unpack them and pull out the core ideas. How does Peterson actually interpret these, ancient biblical stories?
Yeah.
What's he saying they tell us about the divine or about just navigating life today?
Exactly. And I think to really get it, we need to understand his approach first. He's not just reading these as history lessons or religious texts in the narrow sense.
Yeah.
He sees them as encoding these really deep patterns, human behavior, relationships, even the structure of reality itself. So we're going to look at how he uses figures like Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Moses, to explore things like pride, sacrifice, conscience, that whole chaos versus order thing and what the highest good might be. But the key, and it's right there in the title, is we're exploring Peterson's perceptions from these texts.
Got it. Perceptions. Okay. Let's dive right in then. The Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. What's Peterson's take on their roles and the source of error he sees emerging there?
Okay, so he starts with Adam. His role is described as, naming things, bringing order, subduing chaos, basically bringing conscious structure.
Right, the ordering principle.
Yeah. And Eve, she's the necessary partner, but she also seems to represent or speak for the, let's say, the oppressed or marginalized aspects of being, the things Adam's ordering might overlook.
Huh.
She has this sensitivity, so her role is kind of stabilizing, making sure the vulnerable are seen, but also exploratory, pushing boundaries. He even links it slightly to the idea of the logos, but maybe more focused on the human relational side.
That's quite a contrast. So what are the specific errors or patterns of pride he sees developing from these roles?
Well, he outlines these fundamental patterns that he thinks each sex might be more prone to. For Adam, the typical masculine form of pride is often a narcissistic inflation of value, thinking you're, better, more capable, more generous than you actually are.
Right.
He mentions this can connect to things like the dark tetrad in psychology, those less desirable personality traits.
Ooh, right about that.
And for Eve, the feminine temptation he identifies is different. It's sort of using compassion, which is supposed to be good, for narcissistic gain.
Oh, wow.
Like recognizing vulnerability in others, but then maybe exploiting it, or using that sensitivity for self-serving ends. He does note that while the masculine version has these links to studied traits like the dark tetrad, the feminine equivalent is perhaps less studied in that specific psychological framework.
That's a really subtle distinction. Okay, and shifting to internal experience, conscience. Where does Peterson bring that in, especially in these early stories? How does it connect to the divine?
This is really crucial to his reading. He argues that conscience in these narratives and religious thought generally is basically depicted as God's voice.
Correctly.
Yeah. That inner nudge, the suggestion, sometimes that really intense warning, he aligns it with thinkers like Cardinal Newman. For Peterson, this is maybe one of the biggest discoveries in these texts. The idea that you can have a direct relationship with God just by paying attention to your conscience.
Wow. Not just following rules, but an internal connection.
Exactly. It shifts everything.
So then what happens when that's ignored? The loss of paradise, the flaming sword. How does he interpret that? Is it just punishment?
He sees it as more than just punishment. It's like a fundamental condition of reality itself. Nothing unworthy, nothing not aligned with the highest good can enter paradise or heaven. It has to be cut away or burned off.
So the sword is like a filter.
Sort of. He even asks, is there really a conceptual difference between those flaming swords and the fires of hell? He suggests maybe hell or suffering is partly that state of being exiled from the divine because of unrepented evil, creating this awful distance. It points to a kind of cosmic justice, not necessarily God being vengeful, but the built-in consequences of choosing darkness.
Okay, that reframes consequences significantly.
Yeah.
Let's move to Cain and Abel. That theme of hostile brothers feels so ancient, so fundamental. What does Peterson say this story represents?
He sees Cain and Abel as representing two fundamentally opposed ways of being, especially in how they approach sacrifice, what you give up for the future, and how they relate to potential, to unity, both within themselves and with others.
So internal conflict, too.
Absolutely. He emphasizes that the deepest storytellers knew this wasn't just about two guys fighting, it's a battle within every single soul. Are you going to be Abel, offering your best, accepting the outcome? Or Cain, resentful, holding back, blaming God or reality?
And the consequences of Cain's path, what does that lead to?
Well, Cain rejects the moral order. His sacrifice isn't genuine, it's insufficient. And when it's rejected, he turns to bitterness, vengeance, exploiting his brother. Peterson connects this pattern directly to the later flood narrative.
Ah, right. Genesis 6.5, man's wickedness.
Exactly. He argues God's decision to destroy isn't just divine anger, but the inevitable result of humanity violating the intrinsic order of being. It's a hard truth, he says. Consequences are real. Deviating from what's right has severe costs, sometimes costs worse than just physical death.
Okay, so that's individual sibling level. What about when this deviation scales up, the Tower of Babel? What does that symbolize about collective pride and maybe tyranny?
The tower, in Peterson's view, is the perfect symbol of that tyrannical spirit fused with unchecked intellectual and technical hubris. The builders, linked to Cain's descendants, are like these engineers focused only on earthly power and mastery.
Building towards heaven,
But ignoring any actual spiritual hierarchy or higher purpose, they want to make a name for themselves, dominate, not serve.
And the result is chaos, the confusion of languages.
Precisely. And he explains this confusion isn't just about different dialects, it's a fundamental breakdown of shared understanding. Because real communication, he argues, needs a shared grounding in experience, behavior, imagination, and a shared sense of truth. Lies and pride destroy that foundation.
So language itself breaks down.
Yeah, plans become unreliable. He also briefly touches on a potential feminine aspect of this descent into chaos, linking it to imagery like Babylon and Revelation, the idea that when the patriarchal order decays, the matriarchal can also fracture, regressing to raw power and hedonism when the highest ideal is lost.
That makes sense. Lower values rush in. Sodom and Gomorrah is another story of collective rejection and harsh consequences. What does that highlight, especially around hospitality?
Right. Hospitality in that ancient context was absolutely sacred, life or death stuff. Lot offering his daughters, which is deeply disturbing to us. Peterson interprets it within that context as a really perverse, twisted expression of that hospitality principle, linking it wrongly to fertility or provision.
And the men of Sodom reject even that.
They reject it violently, they try to storm the house, and the consequence, they're struck blind, according to Genesis 19.
And that blindness, what does Peterson see it as representing?
Not just physical blindness, he argues, it's conceptual. It's an inability to see the right path forward, an inability to quell their own self-defeating desires. Their approach isn't ask, seek, knock for what's good, it's demand, insist, batter. It's a stark picture of how violating that intrinsic moral order leads to punishment, to being lost.
And Lot's wife looking back, that image is so powerful.
Yeah, he sees that as symbolizing false nostalgia, clinging to a corrupt, tyrannical past even as you're escaping it. Or, in Jungian terms, like a regressive restoration of the persona, refusing to learn from the painful truth, preferring the old ignorance. And he connects it to Christ's warning. Those who knew the master's will but didn't do it get punished more severely. More knowledge, more responsibility.
Okay, so those stories show the perils of going off track. What about the opposite? Those who actually heed a call. Abram, later Abraham, seems like the key example. What does his journey show?
Abram's call is simple. Go forth. Leave your home, your comfort zone. Peterson frames life itself as this series of necessary sacrifices or sacrificial successions. To grow, to mature, you have to give something up: comfort, an old identity, a limited aim.
Right.
And this process of finding a new, higher identity involves constantly reaffirming your commitment to that highest spirit. That's what Peterson sees in Abram, building altars everywhere he goes.
But he messes up too, right? In Egypt.
Oh, absolutely. Peterson makes a point of this. Abram gets scared. He lies about Sarai being his sister twice. He shows greed. It's not a smooth path. But the key is, despite the failures, he keeps going.
And the idea of sacrifice itself, how does that connect to the future?
Peterson sees sacrifice, or work really, as fundamentally bargaining with the future, with possibility. You give up something valuable now, time, pleasure, security, in the faith that it will be returned later, hopefully with interest. It's like a contract with reality.
Requires trust.
Huge trust. And, he notes, an acceptance that some level of inequality is often necessary for wealth creation and society to function, which contrasts sharply with Cain's destructive resentment and envy. He also touches on Sarai's barrenness, relating it to the cultural context where female status was tragically tied to fertility. The male equivalent pain, he suggests, is low comparative status. And outside a stable covenant like marriage, the sexual marketplace can become threatening, destroying trust through short-term strategies. Sacrificing immediate desire for a long-term future, like parenthood, becomes essential.
Okay, that links sacrifice to relationship stability too.
Yeah.
What about Jacob wrestling with God and getting renamed Israel? How does that fit this theme of transformation?
That wrestling, Peterson interprets, is about facing the absolute hardest choices, grappling with reality, with God, to decide what spirit will guide you. And those who wrestle honestly and prevail, meaning they endure the struggle and integrate the outcome, they become the truly chosen in this framework.
So struggle itself is key.
Yes. It leads to transformation, symbolized by the new name Israel, he who wrestles with God. It's climbing that ladder toward the good, and each step requires more courage, more sacrifice.
And Moses, another huge figure wrestling with destiny. What patterns stand out in this story?
Well, Moses' origin story fits that classic hero pattern, dual ancestry, earthly and something higher, like you see with other mythic figures. And his connection to water, chaos rescued from the Nile, parting the sea, water from rock contrast with Egypt's stone tyranny. He brings order from chaos. And the burning bush encounter is huge. Moses turns aside to look. The text says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside, God called. Peterson highlights that. Humility, curiosity, willingness to look at the difficult thing is the precondition for enlightenment.
And taking off his shoes.
Accepting transformation. You can't stand on holy ground as your old self, and God speaks from the ashes life from dissolution.
But even after that, Moses doubts. He's reluctant.
And Peterson really sympathizes. He says, look, we are often just like Pharaoh, stubborn, hard-hearted, clinging to our own little tyrannies, rejecting truth even when it's burning right in front of us.
Yeah, that resonates.
And the message for Pharaoh is important too. Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me. Freedom isn't just for freedom's sake, for hedonism. It's freedom for a higher purpose worship, sacrifice, alignment with God. Even the animals have to go, showing proper stewardship.
And Moses' own main struggle or temptation.
Peterson points to his tendency to use force, compulsion, power, when maybe invitation or persuasion was needed. Killing the Egyptian, the golden calf aftermath, Korah's rebellion, hitting the rock. It's that temptation to force things rather than align with the right way.
Okay, and then Jethro's advice comes in about delegating.
Yes, Exodus 18. Peterson sees this as illustrating the principle of subsidiarity. It's fundamental. Decentralized, distributed responsibility.
The alternative to tyranny or chaos.
Exactly. Push responsibility down to the lowest competent level. Higher levels only step in when needed. He thinks this inspires good institutions like court systems. And internally, consulting conscience, setting goals that bring psychic unity, resilience. And the true leader, he suggests, isn't a revolutionary smashing everything. They renew the genuine covenant with what's always been true and good. They only look revolutionary if society's gone way off track.
Okay, so pulling these threads together, Adam, Cain, Babel, Abraham, Moses. What's the core emphasis Peterson is drawing out about how we should aim ourselves in the world?
The absolute central point is that your aim shapes everything. It defines your moral landscape. It dictates what you even perceive, what you value most. You make sovereign. And these stories, he argues, reveal the structures of worth that guide us, showing the consequences of different aims. They're like essential maps.
And a key part of the right aim involves valuing the individual.
Yes, the intrinsic value of the individual as a child of God. He presents this not just as a belief, but as a necessary axiom for a functional, rights-respecting society. Denying it leads to practical disaster. All hell breaks loose, referencing the 20th century. He even asks if it's that necessary for survival, isn't it true because it's necessary?
That's a provocative thought.
And he connects things like Nietzsche's Death of God or myths like Jonah in the whale to what happens when that central ideal, that living pattern, is ignored or abandoned by a culture or person. The system breaks down. And when that highest unity is lost, what rushes in? Lower deities, basically, pleasure and power. And if you make those your highest values, they inevitably degenerate into tyranny and chaos. The proper order involves encountering chaos, striving upward, truth, voluntary sacrifice. He sees this pattern everywhere, like in Revelation's imagery.
The pleasure and power point is potent.
Yeah.
And linked to that, silence. You mentioned Jonah. There's a strong warning there.
Huge warning. Jonah fleeing God's call to preach to Nineveh, his hated enemies. Being swallowed by the whale, Peterson interprets that symbolically. It's the living hell you create for yourself when you refuse to speak necessary truth, especially difficult truth.
Silence becomes a lie.
Exactly. A lie that consumes you. He links it to Solzhenitsyn on life in tyranny everyone pretends, and that collective silence enables the whole rotten system. And when people see God's actions in the Old Testament as cruel, like in Leviticus 26, Peterson argues, it's not about divine malevolence. It's showing the inevitable, terrible consequences built into reality itself when you deviate from the moral order necessary for life. Sin leads to suffering and death, demonstrated horribly by 20th century ideologies. Conscience warns us away from that path to hell. Cain's resentment is the starting point.
Okay, we've covered so much. Individual error, collective collapse, the call upward, the danger of silence. If you had to boil it down, what's one key takeaway Peterson wants us to wrestle with from these perceptions?
I think it boils down to reaffirming these fundamental things. Aim high toward the best you can conceive. Make the necessary sacrifices for the future. Listen hard to your conscience. Accept responsibility where you are that subsidiarity idea. And maintain a fundamental trust in the value of individuals and the underlying moral structure of being.
Even in suffering.
Especially in suffering, like Job. Faith in yourself, life, God. He even flips it. Maybe God has faith in us to handle the adversity. And finally, belief isn't just saying something is true. It's a commitment. It's choosing to be possessed by the spirit that calls you up the difficult path, not down the easy one. There's no neutral ground. You're always choosing which spirit guides you.
That's definitely a lot to think about. Forces you to look at your own commitments. Okay, so to leave you, our listener, with a final thought based on this deep dive, if Peterson's right that our aim shapes our perception and builds our world, take a moment to ask yourself, what is the highest good you're actually aiming at right now? And what does that aim reveal about the structure of the world you are currently living in and creating? Thank you so much for tuning in to Daily Review. We truly appreciate you joining us for your daily dose of literary exploration. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to share these amazing books with you. If you're enjoying what you hear, please consider taking a moment to subscribe, rate, like, and comment on any of the platforms you're listening from. This really helps support our channel and allows us to get better and bring you even more great content. If today's review sparked your interest and you're ready to dive into a copy of the book, please consider using the link in our description to make your purchase. Not only does it make it easy for you to get your hands on the book, but it also directly supports our channel and the author, allowing us to keep bringing you more great content. Thanks again for being a part of the Daily Review community.